Good news for buyers, not so great news for sellers. When looking at the average sale price this last week compared to roughly the same time period last year, the average sale price only increased by about $2,300. That's only 0.4% higher this year versus last year. I'm Ron Milligan with RE/MAX Select here in Portland's Pearl District, and as usual, I've got our latest market statistics for the full Portland metro area. That includes Southwest Washington and all of the bedroom communities. So let's get into the numbers. First thing up, as always, is the inventory of available listings, so the supply side of the supply and demand equation. The number of active listings was down a smidge versus last week. If you remember last week, we had a bit of a jump down. The inventory, it looked like it might start decreasing, but we're still kind of in that stagnation zone, 5402 versus last week, 5419. So really just down a smidge. And when we compare that number to last year, so roughly the same time period last year, that number was 2984. That's a 73% increase in the number of available listings for buyers to look at. So that means last year at this time, if there were 4 listings for a buyer to look at on the market, that popped on the market during this week, this year they would have 7 to look at versus the 4 they had last year. And one thing for a little bit of context, and I just did a video on this, is where this number falls in the context of our market throughout the past. So over the last 15 years, the number of available listings, so the inventory of active listings, is actually the 3rd lowest that we've seen in the last 15 years. The only 2 years that had lower numbers of inventory was, of course, last year and then 2020 as well. The number of distressed properties on the market, we've been keeping an eye on that, has stayed pretty steady. So we're looking at 44, 27 bank-owned properties and about 17 short sales, and that number has been pretty much in that zone for the last 2 months when we actually started tracking that number. The number of new listings, so new listings to the market, was up a little bit compared to where we were the previous week. Last week we came in at 552, the previous week it was 531. The thing that I think is becoming a bit of a trend now is last year at this time, that number was less than what we saw this year. Last year it was 514, this year it's 552. So we're starting to see more new listings hit the market this year versus last year, which has not been the case throughout the beginning of 2022. And that's only really started to happen in probably the last 3 or 4 weeks that we've seen that. So that is starting to look like a bit of a trend. More new listings hitting the market than we had last year at this time. The number of new pending deals, the number of properties that went under contract, came in at 500. That's slightly lower than what we saw the previous week, which was 509. And of course, last year at this time, that number is significantly higher, 889. Again, completely different rate environment. Rates right now are more than double what they were last year at this time. So not a huge surprise there. The number of price reductions over the last 7 days came in at 683. Of the 683, 652 were still active at the time I pulled the statistics on Tuesday morning, and 31 had gone under contract. That number is pretty much the same as we saw last week and the week before. This is a pretty stable number that we've been seeing as far as price reductions go. Number of homes sold was down again. 462 versus the previous week, 481, the week before that, 506, 479 the week before that. This number continues to slide. When we look at last year, I looked at my notes from last year at roughly the same time period. That number was 699 that closed. And not a surprise, the number of new contracts is sliding, which means that the number of homes that sell is also decreasing. So on average, homes took about 33 days before they received an acceptable offer. Last year that number is 25, and the median came in at 19. Last year that number was 9. So how did the homes that sold do when they actually sold? How did the final sale price compare to the original asking price? On average, they sold at 96.23% of the original asking price compared to last year, 99.48%. So roughly sellers ended up having to discount off their original asking price about 3.75%. And of course, the big news, the average sale price almost matched last year. The average sale price came in at $569,795 versus roughly the same time period last year, $567,464. That's roughly a $2,300 increase, at least it's on the plus side, from last year to this year, which is 0.4% higher this year versus last year. The median was 521 versus 510 last year, and that's a 2.2% increase this year versus last year. Keep in mind that when we're talking about statistics, people can massage those numbers, the statistics, to make them say what they want them to say, or kind of lean them this way or lean them that way. So let me give you a little context. So the number I just quoted you is it's a real small sampling, kind of a volatile number because it's a real small number, and it's comparing this most recent week to roughly the same time period last year. So what was the average sale price during the roughly same time period last year versus this year? RMLS came out with their October statistics. So RMLS is the realtor marketplace. It's where all the realtors post their listings to share with other realtors and with the public. It's the source of the information for everything out there, from Zillow to Redfin to RE/MAX to Realtor.com. It's the source of all of that information. It comes straight from RMLS. So RMLS just came out with their October market action, which is their monthly report. And those figures from that report often get disseminated out in the press, in the media, online, so on and so forth. The numbers that they have in RMLS for appreciation right now are 7.8% or 8.3%. So what that number is the average sale price of the first 10 months of 2021. So the average sale price during that entire chunk of period, they add all the houses together and average them out, come up with an average sale price for that 10-month time period, and then compare it to the first 10 months of 2022. And that gets us a number of 7.8. Reason that this number is higher is because we've got January, February, March, April, kind of into May, which were good, strong numbers, good, strong months for us that help kind of elevate the average sale price when we're comparing it this year to last year. The other number that they have is the 8.3% appreciation. And what that is the 12 most recent months compared to the previous months. And that number is higher because in that mix for the first 12 months, we also have November, December of last year, January, February, March, April, even more good months that are in that full average that they're computing. So that's more of a gradual, kind of backward looking number compared to what we're seeing. If we just compare the month of October of this year to month of October last year, the difference in the average sale price is only 2.9%. And then again, as I said, just comparing the average sale price of a week's time period last year versus this most recent week, it's only a 0.4% increase in the average sale price. So this is telling us that's where the prices are headed. We're headed down, but just bear that in mind if you're seeing somewhere else that the average sale price for the metro area has increased 7.8 or 8.3%. That's the reason why that number is higher. The other thing that I should mention too, and I mention this a lot, our numbers that we pull, our sampling is for the full metro area, including Southwest Washington and all the bedroom communities. The numbers that you typically see in the market action and the number that gets disseminated out to just about everywhere, that is just for Portland proper, so City of Portland. So what does this mean for buyers and sellers? For sellers, maybe not such great news. They still have a lot of equity, but then the numbers are trending down. For buyers, though, it means that you can buy a house this year at last year's prices. And a lot has changed since last year. Last year was a super competitive market for buyers, and they had to bid way over asking price and make all sorts of concessions to sellers and just get beaten up and pummeled by the sellers throughout the entire transaction. That's not the case anymore. So negotiating is back on the table. You know, there is a seller with an asking price, but as a buyer, you can go in and you can negotiate that price with the seller. Concessions are back on the table. You can go into the transaction and ask the seller to pay a portion of your closing costs, or even ask the seller to buy down your interest rate with like one of these short-term interest rate buy down products, where effectively the seller, over the next 2 or 3 years could make your 7% interest rate feel like a 5% interest rate or something similar to that. Ask me about that if you have some questions. There are some really cool products out there. But it also means that inspections are back on the table. Last year, buyers were having to waive inspections entirely or promising not to ask for any repairs or credits in lieu of repairs. This year, inspections are back on the table. Health and safety issues are back on the table. Deferred maintenance are back on the table. It's all a negotiation at this point. And then last year at this time, buyers had to waive finance contingencies and promise that if the appraisal came in low, which happened quite often, that they would bring in the extra cash to make the deal work. That's not a case anymore. So if the appraisal comes in low, it's now at the very least a negotiation between the buyer and the seller about how they want to handle that. And then the last thing is, when buyers bought last year, often they had to give the seller 30 or even very often 60 days of rent back. That meant the buyer purchased the home, they gave all their money, they paid all their money for the purchase of the home, title was transferred, they were the new owners of the home, but they had to give the seller 30 and often 60 days of free rent back. So they bought the home, they don't even get to stay in it for the next 60 days, and they had to let the seller stay in it for rent, rent free. And that's not the case anymore. It's all negotiation. If buyers are allowing sellers to stay after closing, it's a real short time period, or the sellers have to pay the buyers for that time period that they stay in what is now the buyer's home. So that's what I have for you today. I'm very happy that you stuck around to the very end of the video. I really do appreciate that. And as always, I love a thumbs up, and I would love it if you subscribe to this video if you have not yet. And if you run into someone who you think might need this information, I would love it if you shared the video with them. And I will see you next week.